Hello. After a week's break, actually, not a 1 week break, it was just one episode break. I mean, we took 1 week break because it was Diwali. Diwali everywhere. Things were happening all across the world. India has started colonizing the world. So that's another news. Slowly, gradually, the meme was up on Twitter and everywhere that it's no more cool to be only a CEO of a big company. You need to be like president, prime minister, vice president, or something of that sort. So that's the
For
new all.
for someone listening to this podcast in 2025 or 2050,
Yeah.
hopefully people listen to our podcast till then. Uh, a British Indian person just got elected as the Prime Minister of Britain, Mr. Rishi Sunak. So that's what Sadaf is talking about. अगर आपको पता
Correct.
नहीं है. Yeah.
Who is a
And
lot
happy
more
Diwali,
richer.
you Sadaf.
Happy Diwali to you too, belated.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy Christmas in advance if we're just going ahead with it. Anyway, we will continue
Yeah.
with all that. Today, I am super excited for many reasons, of course. Because we're going to talk about spices, right? It's going to be, and I love spices. I always tell people that the soul of a food is in spice, right? It adds that. In Hindi, it sounds much better, not in English. So in Hindi, it is खाने की रूह मसालों में बसती है. So that's such a beautiful part. And I have, actually not I, both of us, Naan Curry has a guest, Sarina Kamini.
Hello.
I have tracked her down, the Spice Mistress. That's how she goes by. We'll explore further. The first time when Sarina and I had a little bit of interaction was many moons ago. I don't even remember now that why we had an interaction, but we did. And here we are talking about spices. Sarina loves spices the way people love chocolates. Compulsively, that's what she says. As a spice mistress, she hears a song of spices and translates that for her students, which means that she's also a teacher. She teaches, well, she talks about spices, how spices add spice in your all-day meal, every day, every moment, I believe. As a career-wise, she's a food and culture writer in Paris, Los Angeles, Melbourne, Barcelona, combined with homes in Bangalore or Bengaluru and New Delhi. She has got humongous, other synonyms of the same word, experience in spice. As of now, she lives in Western Australia. And if you follow her on Instagram and other social media possible, you would know beautiful kitchen, lush green in the background. And you are my friend. If you don't know or if you don't like spices enough, then she surely will make you fall in spices. That's a guaranteed thing. So welcome, Sarina, again.
Thank you, Sadaf. That is the most beautiful introduction I have ever had. So thank you so much for that. Yes, I do love spices. I say, as in terms of non-animate things, they are the most beloved to me. So my children and my husband and my dog, of course, but spices come a pretty close second. So yeah, it's a joy for me to spend this time talking with you about that.
Awesome. Same.
Superb.
If my memory is not ditching me, Sarina, one of the video maybe you mentioned that spices are living beings. Did you mention that?
Oh, they are.
Yes.
I do think that. I actually, so I do spend a lot of time teaching. So my dad's Kashmiri and my mum's Australian, and we grew up sort of between two places. But we were just sort of talking off air, as it were, talking about, I guess, what it is to be an Indian in the diaspora. So, like to be outside the subcontinent, but still carry that cultural legacy. And I feel like, Indians live within a really beautiful framework that's very much defined by food. And for an Indian, definition of food comes from aromatics. It comes from spices. Well, masala, masala is what we call it, but spice is the English word. So I just can't remember what I'm responding to. Can you help me?
You're just telling me
what was I starting?
Just telling me how
I love it. I get carried away.
Which is fantastic. We just want this free flow. At some point in time, At some point, Achit and I will stop asking the question. We'll just ask whatever we feel like.
I just
You-
love it. I think what I was talking about was teaching people about how animate they are. So
Yes.
I live now in Australia, in Western Australia, which is a regional town. I think Perth, which is our nearest capital city, is the most remote capital city in the world.
Mhm.
And we live 3.5 hours drive from there. So it's a very far-flung corner of the world. The next stop for us is Antarctica. And that's a very long way away. So, so we look out to emptiness, when we look at our coast. The people that I teach have really no contact with the traditions of the subcontinent. And so spice has a very narrow gauge here. The way that people use flavor, the way that they think about approaching spice and its in the messaging that it carries, I think for me is so important. And so really when I teach, that's what I translate. And they are so animate, they are so live, they carry information of who we are now, who we've been in the past, who we want to be in the future. And that information is like radio bandwidths. So you can change that messaging depending on who's handling the information. So I handle it in a particular way, and the way that I teach spice classes is I try to give people information that they can then create their own framework for what it means to have a relationship to spice or to masala, and then to how to work with that flavor, because to me that's the beauty, is the personality.
Wow.
Sure. So I want to talk about you before we at last start talking about spices. You're
Okay.
called the Spice Mistress.
Yes.
Tell us how you got that label, and I mean, what influences and experiences in your life led you to get that label?
Okay. I don't really remember if that was something, I think it's something I kind of came up with, and it fitted a little bit with how I belong in this community. So I love the environment. And if anyone can look at Margaret River at all and just Google some images, it is spectacular. Oh, can I sidestep and tell you this story before I go into that story?
Yeah.
Okay. So I grew up between cultures, which is a lot of how people are these days. Very few of us are one thing, and very few of us live in one place. And it was always, when I was in India, I never quite felt Indian. And when I was in Australia, I never quite felt Australian. And that's part of the, it's just part of the circumstance of being from two-parent lineage like that. When I moved to Margaret River, I never felt so at home. And I've lived in, as Sadaf was saying earlier, I think I've lived on 4 continents, maybe 3. I don't know, lots of cities. I've lived everywhere, all over. I learned multiple languages. And I moved to Margaret River and I instantly felt at home. And about 4 years into being here, I found out that our landscape is defined by a coastal ridge. So it's this big cliff infrastructure, and it extends for about 120 kilometers. And that piece of land that we all live on is actually ancient India. So when the continents shifted in Pangaea, times of Pangaea, what has become the subcontinent collided with what is now the west coast of Australia and left behind this gigantic piece of its landscape. And the soil here, some of the soil geography here, the strata, is only seen in India. That's the only other place that it exists. So I found the only place in the world where I can be in both my countries at the same time, which is a kind of brilliance and beauty. So when I moved here, I just felt instantly at home, and I became a really big part of the community, and environmental interaction is a part of that. So for me, that Spice Mistress moniker is really about being connected to, I guess, the environment and to the seasons and to the geography. And being able through that connection to be able to tell the story of spice to a human audience, and to give all of the sensory information and to embody that sensory experience of what spice actually holds. And I call myself a spice mistress because I really do feel like I'm a muse of that thing, that's where the information sits, and I translate that story, but the information isn't mine and it doesn't come from me and I don't hold it. I feel like I'm, is it too weird to say, a bit of a conduit for that space? I don't ever want to be seen as to be the one being in possession of that wisdom, because I definitely don't think that I am. I think that it's my role to work as the intermediary between spices and people, and to share that and help them fall in love in the same way that I have.
It's just sorry, just before I just say anything, it's just interesting because you say it's just you're the intermediary, right, of what spices are telling or their story, and you are basically like a translator, right? And then taking it to the people who are using the spices, and sort of bringing both of them together. It's just lovely. And what you said towards the end, making people fall in love with spices the way I am. That's what I say. That my role is just to make people fall in love with the food the way I am in love. So it's just pretty sort of amazing to understand that there are more people who are just working as mediators between the spices. So, yeah.
I love that
Sadaf,
I love how poetic you got about spices. And to me, spices are interesting because every person has a different threshold for spices, and also what in terms of what they like. So it varies from person to person. I like more jeera powder, cumin powder in my dal. Somebody else might like more degi mirch in their dal. So it's very swad anusar, as we say, as the Sanjeev Kapoor used to say in his TV shows. But I'm curious, why spices? Why not say bread, cheese, meats?
Because I'm an Indian daughter, because I'm the daughter of a Kashmiri Pandit. That's why. Because that's not how we grew up. Like I guess, like love is keema, rasma keema, and love is matar paneer, and love is dad's dal, and love is basmati rice and chapati, and that's what love is for me. So I my dad passed away a few years ago, just right before COVID, and I miss him so much every day. We had a very challenging relationship. I think the way that lots of Indian fathers and Indian daughters do in modern environments, there's lots of cultural difficulty involved in growing up in a family and parents letting go of children, and I think all of those things. And to be quite specific, we grew up in a Hindu household, and there's lots of this might be controversial to say, but there's lots of frameworks for Hinduism that are repressive for women. And I love my faith and I love my family, but I also very much validate myself as a human being and as someone that deserves to be heard as much as anyone else. And so, I think fighting that fight sometimes creates difficulty in families, and it created difficulty with me in my relationship with him. But whenever I miss him, oh my God, I wish I could show you my kitchen bench top. So there's kebab on the table and paratha and the oil, the mustard oil still in the kadai on the stove. And I'm home by myself tonight, and I cooked for 3 hours to feed myself because
all that.
Yeah, for me.
Yeah.
Because why not? I think that's why spice, that's why not cheese, or why not bread, or why not wine, or it connects me to an incredible landscape that is defined by spice and by food and by smell and by gods and by ancestry, and it's such an exotic landscape. And I'm a natural born storyteller. He was a natural born storyteller. I've worked as a journalist. I'm an author. Like, it's seductive. Like, there's nothing to me that's more seductive than spice and fantasy and gods, and that whole landscape is just,
Wow.
Why would you want to live anywhere else?
It's interesting because as a non-Kashmiri, I always thought that Kashmir equals to breads and of course spices, but mostly fennel seed, saffron, and just a bunch of here and there spices. But of course, I believe in, because saying equal love for spices, I do find it a lot more seductive. I think you use it the way you want. How much, Archit, like, because now you have moved to Madrid, so this is Archit's question: how much do you miss spices in Madrid?
So at regular supermarkets, you don't get Indian spices. I mean, you get some of them. You can get cumin, you can get black pepper, but to get those spice mixes, you have to go to a specific area which is not like close to my house. So I go for monthly spice shopping, just for spices, because everything is available everywhere. Just the spice mixes from Shan Masala and from, what's the other one with the mustache? I forgot. Why am I forgetting? The other masala company.
MDH.
So MDH and Shan, I get their
How can
spices.
you forget MDH? What kind of anti-national are you? You remember Shan Masala, but not MDH.
Forgive me, my masters.
So I do have to say that when I lived in Barcelona, I did find the Spanish food wanting. Do you eat very much of it? I didn't love it. I felt like it was too much the same and not enough, I don't know, jazz in there.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think I'm very close to creating like a spice box in my backpack. So whenever I'm going out to eat at a restaurant, just put spice in the food. Because what's good here is the quality of ingredients compared to Delhi, especially quality of meats. That's really good. So in my head, there's so much potential to create amazing things, but most food I'm eating here, especially Spanish food, lacks that jazz, as you said, and it could do with literally a bit of spicing up. So yeah, I often cook Spanish dishes at home. For example, I would get a semi-made paella, like a semi-cooked paella, and finish it off at home. And without Indian spices, the paella feels bland. So I actually add a bit of spice to the paella, and it elevates it to the next level. So it's an interesting question, Sadaf. And actually, on that note, I have a question for you, Sarina. Often when you're outside India, there's a sort of a myth or halo around spices. Like spice means mirch, spice means chili, it means hot. And a lot of people, when they go to Indian restaurants, I've seen them say that, hey, can you make it less spicy? Can you make it less hot? Can you make it slightly sweet? So people often conflate hot with spicy. How do you overcome that problem of communication?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question, Archit, because Kashmiri food typically is not driven by heat. You know, anyone who knows Kashmiri food knows that. And so the first thing I do in a class is talk to people about the regionality of Indian cuisine, and that there is no such thing as Indian food, that's a misnomer, and that really each region has its own culinary interpretation in each state and village and town, and there are some dishes that change from village to village. And I mean, it's so it's what's so exciting about Indian food as a grouping is how diverse it is within that framework. So I talk a lot about that because it's very important to understand how complex it is. And I love that you said they see spice with a halo, because really a lot of the work that I do is what I call decoding or demystifying or de-exoticizing. Is that a word? I think I just made the word up. De-exoticizing spice. Because when something's exotic, it's automatically, I understand that there's something seductive about exotic people, ingredients, places, but what it does is it creates a barrier between you and that thing. And that's what that word exotic does. It's not of me, it's of something else. So as a writer and a journalist, I work a lot in linguistics with people to teach them about what spice is. So what I do is I introduce spice to them through raw tasting. So I take my dabbas, I have like 6 masala dabbas, and I take them to classes, and I have people taste spices raw, just to eat them, to give them actual immediate sensory connection to that individual aromatic. Because as soon as you can have a personal experience of an ingredient or a person or a language or a place, it ceases to become exotic and it starts to become universal and relatable, and you start to have a unique relationship to that thing. And that's the only way to have someone understand that spice is more than a singular word. It is actually a universe of individual aspects. And I think the biggest barrier to Westerners understanding what spice is that Indians don't use that word. So we talk about masala, and masala means like a million different things, but there is nuance embedded in that word. In spice, there's no nuance, it's a singular, and that's part of the problem. So I really have to strip away language and strip away cliche, and it takes, I feel like my classes run about 2 hours, and I feel like it's in the last 10 minutes that it all comes together. I honestly feel like I spend an hour and 45 minutes undoing preconception, like in a really sensory way, just to be able to open them to an idea of something new. It's actually quite difficult.
I'm curious because on that same the classes you talked about, I'm assuming all sorts of students come and join the class. But has there been the out of the world kind of a comment that you must have received from your students saying, "Oh, I did not know about this," or "This is a new thing that I learned," or something which is witty, funny, whatever it is that you might remember?
Okay, so the most common thing is mustard oil. So no one here ever knows about mustard oil and has ever tried it and even knew it existed. So every single class, I've taught classes for 5 years, and I mean thousands of people now. I always find that fascinating. 100% strike rate of not knowing what that is.
Wow.
Oh, other than the few Indians that have been in the classes like on and off, there's been a couple, maybe a handful. I think the reaction to kala namak, I always put that in the mix, and I love the raw taste of that. Like that is really fun. I never say what it's going to be, and I just watch the faces explode as they try it. Like, what? What was that? Is that like egg, or is that like salt, or is that like, so that's, but honestly, to be honest, one of the things I love about it the most is that when I give spice when you taste it raw, I give quite directed tasting notes. So I work with their palate in terms of identifying, shape, where it sits, aromatic, word indicators, so ways to connect them to what they're feeling. And one of the things I really love is sometimes when people have quite acute palates is they'll give me interpretations of spices that I've never thought of before. So different kinds of tasting notes. So like, I'm trying to think of one. So like, so amchur, for example, someone told me once it tasted like chicken skin. And as soon as they said that and I tasted it, I'm like, oh my God, I can totally taste chicken skin. And I'd never thought of that before. Oh gosh, it's hard to remember because there's so many classes and so many people, but kala namak like has this, someone said to me once, like movie, when you go to the movies and you buy popcorn?
Yeah.
it has a little bit of that taste on it, a chemical butter popcorn taste as well. Like it's so these funny little ways to think about spices that I never normally would come to on my own, that I get little indicators of.
As you're saying, I'm just also trying to think that what kind of flavor is it?
You need to I feel like I should have given you a list of spices to have in front of you, and we could have tasted them and gone through it. We'll have to do that another time, because
the next podcast.
Yeah, because it's most people don't try their spices raw. Have you ever done that, either of you?
I do it. When I work in the kitchen, I make sure that all my kitchen chefs, they must try all the spices individually, as well as a mix of spice as well, like the spice powder. For two reasons, not in the detail that you ask your students to, but I tell them to taste it so that they know the intensity of all these spices and how much to put, and also that they should know the flavor of each spices, that towards the end, the kind of dish or the final dish that they would get is this spice that has added XYZ flavor in the food. People don't like me for that, but I still do it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I'm interested to what's really interesting to me is that the response that I've had from Indian audiences watching what I do, because when I first started, I thought that maybe I'd get criticized for what I do, from that community. I wondered whether or not, I think that's part of being like a halfie, is you wonder, well, maybe I'll be not authentic enough to tell this story, or maybe I'll be judged for that reason. But what I've loved about it is that there's quite a really strong growing regional Indian community on social media in Australia, really educating the larger population about the differences of regionality when it comes to Indian food. And everyone has been so supportive of what I do and loves what I do. And I think that's because, when you grow up with spice, you actually find it quite hard to talk about it outside of you, because it seems so natural. Like, what would there be to say? I feel like that's a thing. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. Yep. This is. I was just thinking, people need to talk about. People talk multiverse and astroverse and whatnot. People talk about spiceverse. That's a different.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate multiverse.
That's how it should be. So
yeah,
one of your articles have talked about that, and again, I would like to believe it's a tall claim because I don't understand as of now. And you say that finding a balance in spice helps you find balance in life as well.
Oh yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, like that is the thing.
Why? How?
Can I say that? How?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
That's what I don't understand.
Oh, okay. Oh, how long have we got again?
Carry on. We can stay here.
Okay. All right. I think that paying attention to the sensory body is the fundamental way of living a life where no matter what's occurring externally, the internal landscape has a balance. Just like water finds its level, the most important thing as a human being is able to find an internal level no matter the external environment. Because that's your experience, your lived experience every day that you're alive is that.
But so, I mean, it's like, how does spice help you understand or get to the roots of a balance?
Because
like adding more, balancing it out with, like, let's say adding lemon and chili will help you understand life. I don't.
Well, because what you consume says an enormous amount about who you are and how you feel about yourself. So when you feed yourself, it is the most direct relationship with yourself that you have. You're literally putting something in your mouth and you're consuming it. And that consumption is responsible for your life force maintenance. If you don't eat, you'll die, right? So what you're putting into your mouth is responsible, that's how you keep yourself alive and functioning. So the way that I teach in classes is to begin to give people an understanding that caring for yourself in your environment begins with understanding why you feed yourself what you do, how that affects you, and how you want to be affected by food, and how you want to really live your life on a daily basis. Do you want to live well and peacefully? Do you want to have a harmonious existence? Do you want to, and not everyone does, by the way, and that's a choice. But it's about teaching people how to feel. And food is a really significant way to teach yourself your state, how to understand your own state. Am I hungry? When I feed myself, how do I feel about that taste? Because the one thing about food, the really fundamental thing about food is taste and flavor are different.
Good.
So taste is the chemical interpretation of, I mean, I'm not a scientist, okay? I'm a spice mistress. So this is my spice mistress interpretation of taste, is the way that your palate interprets the sensory information you're giving it through food. And everyone's palate will generally experience taste in similar ways, although people do have different sensibilities and acuities, especially when it comes to things like bitterness and acidity and sweetness. That aside, taste is almost set. Flavor is what happens when taste intersects with your emotional body and your experiential body and your spiritual body.
Okay.
And from that, you interpret flavor. So when you give someone a dish of food and everyone at the table eats it, you may as well, it's the same thing as if you give that same group of friends a book and they all read it. They'll all come back to you with a different interpretation of that book. Everyone at that table is going to come back to you with a different interpretation of what that dish meant flavor-wise, because it's running through their individual character. Most people can't articulate how they feel about taste because they're not connected to their sensory bodies and they don't know how to do it. If you teach someone that skill, it's translatable. And that's what I mean about this connecting you to how to living a better life, because as soon as you have the ability to understand how flavor affects you, you begin to understand how words affect you. How does it affect me when I decide to feel a certain way about something somebody says to me? How does it affect me when I decide to think a certain way about something that I'm undertaking? So it's really about starting to pay attention to the ways in which we move through our life. And I do that through food. Some people do it through art. Some people do it through music. Some people do it through knitting. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's just that in this community, if you're talking about food, that's the starting point. If that's where you live, if that's where you put yourself, then use it and expand it. And don't just make it about beautiful taste, make it about beautiful life, because it's right there for you.
I always had the inclination and hunch that there's a spirituality between food and spirituality, but I didn't know there's a connection between spirituality and spices as well.
Well, yeah, but of course, when you go to, I mean, I don't know what do you have a faith tradition?
Well, yes and no, both depends on the days.
Okay, well, like we grew up with food. Food is ritual and food is food. So, like you go to the ashram and you're given certain food, and on certain offering days, you give certain food and you receive certain food, or you don't eat certain food, or like food is a very literal, and not just, I mean, I'm Hindu, so I speak from my faith tradition, but it's Christian faith. Fish and bread and wine. It's like Islamic faith, Ramadan, it's Jewish faith. Like, you know, it's like every single faith tradition has very strong culinary ties, like embedded into the foundational texts of those faiths. So it's a very, I feel like from that perspective, it's a very direct connection. And even from, and just kind of interrupt me, I talk a lot, like I love this. So like, I feel like,
Please do. Between Archit and me, it's just me. So I'm glad that between there's always somebody else to sort of top
All
me
right.
up. Basically.
Okay, good. So, and then when you talk about not just, so take faith out of it. Sorry, my email's going crazy. So take faith out of it and just put it into tradition. So when you look at all culinary traditions, not just Indian or Eastern, even like Japanese, Korean, Southeast Asian, but look at Italian, French, Greek, you know, places that have very long standing traditions in food. Food is a framework for cultural understanding. So, you know, how the French way of eating has been, for want of a better word, canonized by the, you know, like 7 Wonders of the World people who do that stuff, like the UN.
UNESCO?
Yeah, no, by the UN as being like an actual, like
the UNESCO
historical preservation thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because culturally, it's so important. So I deal in a culture, the Australian colonized culture is 200 and something years old, like not even 300 years old. So I deal with people who come from that space, who find food really challenging. They find the whole idea of diet and health incredibly challenging because they don't have a framework to think about food. So the frameworks that they have are outside in, they're externally put over, like by diet culture, by whatever's new in science, by nutritional discoveries. And you know how convoluted that stuff is. It's like one time fat's bad, the next thing sugar's bad. Like, don't eat this, now don't eat that. And it's so confusing. But when you belong to a traditional culinary space and you're educated in what that means, you have this beautifully defined framework for how to eat, for how to think about how to eat, and for how to think about how you eat affects the way in which you live your life.
Right. You know, that's fascinating to me, and this actually leads me to my next question. It's both a thought and a question. So often at the surface level, spices are considered as taste enhancers or flavor enhancers. But spices are also medicine. For example, when I have a bad throat, I have something called Trikatu Churan. It's essentially a mix of black pepper, long pepper, and ginger powder, and it just treats my throat really well. Now, I think the popularity of these spices is, as spices as medicine, is limited to India. Even in India, you know, where we follow now Western frameworks of the latest study or whatever the pharmaceutical drug that the doctor is prescribing to us. How do you overcome this challenge? I think it's a marketing challenge. How do you overcome this marketing challenge of spreading the medicinal know-how of spices to the rest of the world, even to other Indians?
Yeah, so that's a thank you for asking that question, because that is one of the most every class, that's what everyone wants to know. And I always begin the classes by talking about the regionality of Indian food, but also the origin of that regionality, which is that spice is medicine and that spice came first and food came later. So the culinary culture exists because we needed vehicles to consume spice. So that's what it is. So when you look at the regionality of food, it tells you about the ways in which traditional medicine dictates that consumption aids health in that environment. So when you look at, I think it's so interesting to look at that, because when you look at it, you see that, you know, those dry hot curries like biryanis, tandoor, whatever, that all comes from the dry desert part of India. Like the south, where it's wetter and humid, those dishes are saucier. The heat's humid heat, it's acidic, it's brighter, it's, you know, it's fitting for that environment. Kashmiri food is deep, complex, but also smooth and elegant, and that fits that mountain landscape. So the way that I teach health through spice is about helping people to understand that primary for human health is lack of stress. That's the number one. If you go to any doctor, what they'll say is what will kill you before anything else is stress. So being stressed about what you're eating is counterintuitive. So I'm a huge proponent of pleasure and kindness and generosity when it comes to food. Now, there's a difference between that and gluttony. So one of the things about spices, one of the really medicinal qualities about spice is that the complexity of aroma, when you construct a masala, the complexity of aroma means that the experience of eating is established in the mouth as a very textural, sensory, full experience that enables the body to experience satisfaction orally, which I'm sorry, that has like everyone's, which experience satisfaction orally before. So this is part of the Spice Mistress. Before you have to wait for your stomach to be bloated. Mm. So eating less over a lifetime is one of the key indicators of health in every single old traditional food culture that exists. Yeah. And the way to eat less over a lifetime but still eat beautifully is to use aromatics thoughtfully and to use fats well and to eat whole foods and to eat them in smaller amounts. Now, anyone that looks at any of my social media media channels will see I'm a very small person in terms of weight, not in terms of space in a room, but yeah. And I eat beautiful food that I cook fresh and that I take the time to handle well, and that I think about the spice application. If I'm feeling like I need some strength, I use more bitter spices. I use things like turmeric and fenugreek powder and pungent spices like maybe clove powder and things that are deeper and heavier and sit deeper in the system. If I feel like I need some movement, I'll use more like heat and, you know, acidic spices and maybe a little bit more salt and a bit lighter fat just to kind of keep my system light. So it's just about paying attention to the system, and then everything you eat is medicinal. That's kind of the point. Like, food is medicine, whether or not it's good medicine or bad medicine. You can think about it any way you want, but it's always medicine. Yeah. So when you sort of remove the idea that it's only medicine if you apply it like that, do you see what I'm saying? People think food as medicine means quinoa, or food as medicine means goji berries, or food as medicine means turmeric powder, haldi. Like, everything you eat directly affects your physical wellness, your spiritual wellness, and your emotional wellness. By virtue of that, everything you put in your mouth has the capacity to be either medicinal. Well, it's all medicinal. It's just sometimes it's a drug that's bad for you, and sometimes it's something that will sustain you. Am I speaking whack?
No, or the last bit?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That makes sense to me. Food as a hedonistic food for hedonism and pleasure is something, I guess, relatively novel. Food as medicine is an idea which is old, and if I tell my grandmother about it, she would get it.
She
Okay.
would or she wouldn't?
She would get it.
Yeah, she would get it.
Yeah.
She would know
Yeah.
it. I mean, that's what that's the importance of matriarchal lineage too, is, as a mother, I have 2 sons, 15 and 12. Every mother feeds their children food like it's medicine.
Yeah.
That's, and so that sort of very home cooking type of food traditionally, the values that come through that are so important, because that's what we do. I mean, not just mothers. Some fathers are brilliant cooks, and my dad was. He did that thing. Everything you feed your child is to give them the best possible chance at being incredible humans, because that's the only thing that parents want.
Absolutely. And so many of the modern diseases arise out of having a bad diet or bad eating habits. And logically, a lot of diseases can be reversed through a proper dietary regime. And that dietary regime does not have to be boring. If it is, it can be traditional, and it can be healthy and tasty.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I think it also comes down to there's lots of, and this is a little bit. I mean, honestly, it's the privilege for me of living in an environment where physical movement is really simple to do as well. So, food doesn't exist. Nothing exists in isolation. Spice doesn't exist in isolation. Yeah. So there's lots of that's around it as well. And I guess I don't want to oversimplify, but for me, one of the big questions I get, so if anything has attracted attention to the Indian style of eating, it's the whole turmeric thing.
Yeah.
So all of the world is in love with like turmeric haldi as like a anti-inflammatory wonder drug. And it's the biggest thing I get into my class is one of the things is, how do I eat more of it? And one of the ways I reset is to help people understand that the whole way of eating, in terms of like that Ayurvedic thought around food as medicine, is that everything is designed to be anti-inflammatory in combination, or at least that's what we're constantly working with, that balance between inflammation and anti-inflammatory, because inflammation is illness in the system, like looking at traditional ways of thinking about health, and that you can't single out a spice, because spices are like people. We work better together. We don't work in isolation. Spices are the same. You can't pull one out and expect it to do the job. It won't. It needs its support of its compadres, to use a bit of Spanish for you.
I no hablo español. Something like that.
Hablo un poquito español. He olvidado mucho.
I didn't
I've forgotten
understand
most
that
of it.
either. When I said I don't understand Spanish anymore, whatever you say, nice.
Chutki bar Spanish aati hai mujhe, is what she said. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now I know. It's interesting because you mentioned about the role of spices in totality when all the spices comes together. We'll take a tiny break because I have a very interesting question. I think it's interesting because all my questions I think are interesting. So we'll take a break and we'll come back to it. So let's take a break.
Hey everyone, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Life Manifesto, Sarina shares 7 techniques to overcome festive fatigue. On the Advertiser's Guide to the Galaxy, Karthik decodes the relaunch of Havells Hawa Badlegi ads and the shortcomings the brand faced in the past. On Has It Aged Well, Abbas and Urjita are joined by comedian Pavitra Shetty to revisit Farah Khan's directorial debut, Main Hoon Na, and talk about their shared love for Shah Rukh Khan. And of course, do not forget to subscribe to the IVM Pop channel for all the latest episodes. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth shares his thoughts on whether pursuing an MBA degree is still worth it. And on The Habit Coach, Ashton welcomes Natasha Moore, founder of Natasha Moore Cosmetics. They talk about how putting makeup on can be an empowering activity and dispel some stereotypes around it. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some super cool and exciting stuff for you. Also, do follow us on social media properties. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also, do remember to spread the word, as you know, it helps a lot. And of course, don't forget to rate and review our shows on whatever platform you're listening to them. You can also check out all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, Kotak Privy League Program, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you so much for making this possible.
And we are back with this spicy trail, spicy stories with the Spice Mistress. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, that you mentioned very beautifully that spices are like people; they work together. When I'm cooking, I always call spices mostly spice mix. This is the definition for spice mix. That difference of, like, say for example, to be very specific, let's say you're making kebabs, because I love kebabs. You're making kebabs, and then you add a whole bunch of different kinds of spices, right? Now all of them have separate properties, separate flavoring, right? And I call them as like a beautiful symphony, a jazz music, because every spice is playing its own role, just like jazz. So a drummer is playing something else, a cello guy, a guitar, piano, etc. Everybody are playing basically their own tune, and yet they come together as one jazz, right? So there's a bass tone, there's upper tone, there's lower tone, right? Just like jazz, same with kebabs, same with the spices. How do you, when you're making any dish, and you can pick any of your favorite dish, what would be the components that you look for in same fashion, or I don't know how you define it?
So what do you like? Tell me what do you like? You like it to be what? Do you like it to be particularly jazzy? Is that what you're telling me?
No, I think the different spices, when they come together, it's like a jazz symphony, because all of them are playing their music. So I like all the different tones hitting at the same time. I usually don't prefer like a flat tone. Even if it's flat, I would add a little bit of lemon, and then that rounds the flavor for me.
Yep. So what you're telling me is so I can see you through there, Sadaf. I'm like a spice savant. I know about you from how you like to eat.
Damn.
So I can see the thing that you like in food is excitement.
That is true.
Yeah.
In life.
In life.
It's all about balance.
Yeah, I get it. I can see it.
Yeah.
And I think that for you, it's lower. If you were to tell me about what spices do you like to eat, tell me.
Me or Sadaf?
Yeah. No, you.
You are the one who is called Archit, not me. Just
yeah, exactly.
Degi mirch, garlic. Yeah, those are my top two, I think. Black pepper as well.
Okay, so you're so he's but no, he doesn't like upper tone, because he said black pepper. He's a dark horse. You know what a dark horse? Yeah. So he's like,
I know what a dark horse is, but what does it mean in this context?
It means that you like the things that aren't said, but you also like you're a man in contradiction. That's what that means. That you come across as being like one thing, but you also have this like other element that you don't always show.
Archit, basically, it means, Archit, you have very bad communication skill. You're never
No, it doesn't. It means for women, he's probably really attractive, actually. That's probably what that means. But
no more in the market, he is. He's off the market.
Well, that's unfortunate for him.
I hope my fiance is listening and feels grateful.
I'm sure she will.
We'll make her listen to this podcast. I will.
Or she'll laugh, one or the other.
I will text her the link, and I will let her know about this.
No, I can see it. Like I could make you both food that you would love just with that little bit of information. But for me, I say, so my home food is food that's complex internally, but soft externally. So I always say velvet, iron fist in a velvet glove. That's my that's my trademark, and that's probably as a personality. That's pretty much me. Everyone thinks I'm velvet glove, but there's a whole lot of iron fist in there.
Wow. This is like some sort of a spice astrology
psychology. It totally but it is that if you don't understand, like, how people eat is so much information about how they are as people. Totally. Even the things, like, even when you find people who don't like anything, that tells you heaps about them too.
What that would be if somebody doesn't like anything in particular?
Then that people don't like a lot of things. It means they're in their conflict with their environment, but that's their comfortable space.
Oh,
okay.
For some people, that's comfortable. They'd rather be in conflict with everything than in harmony with, with it all. And that's fine. That's just a different way of living.
What would you call? What would you call someone who does not like? You know what is vada pav, Sarina?
Vada pav?
Yeah. You know what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like vada, like the South Indian, like the mean the vada? Yeah.
No, not the South Indian, the Maharashtrian one. The fried potato patty with buns.
Oh yeah. I know that. Yep.
So what would you call someone who does not like vada pav, and also pursues intermittent fasting?
Someone who lives a little bit of a life of contradiction, and I believe that is that Archit right there? Is that who I'm looking at?
Yeah.
Yep, you are.
Yeah.
It's all under the table with that guy set up. I'm telling you, gotta watch out.
Under the table.
I should be careful now.
You got to be careful.
Yeah.
It's a good thing that he's in Madrid now.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd
what about Sadaf? What about Sadaf? Sadaf, what's your favorite spice?
He's the showman. He's the showman. Yeah. He likes the jazz. He likes the high tone. Yeah, I see it.
It's all about excitement in life. That's what I like.
Love this. Yeah. I mean, I've seen people analyze others through their hands, through their gestures, body language, but this is fascinating. Exactly. And like people through spices. Yeah, love it. Yeah. I want to ask you a slightly boring question, but very useful for a lot of people, especially me. What are your tips to store spices so that they don't lose their essence?
Okay, that's a super good one. So, first things first is you have to find a spice merchant that you trust. So someone who has very good quality spice, who doesn't store spice for a very long time, who sells through in high quantity. So you know that when you buy from them, it's not stale. It's really important. When you buy from that person, you buy in the quantity that you know you use. So I use an enormous amount in my life and in my profession. And I keep, because I teach classes and I teach privately. So I carry my kit with me when I go. I don't have a cooking school, like a stable school. So I that's why I have so many masala dabbas, because I keep all the spices in there. So I put them in those in the katoris and the masala dabbas, and I go through them and I wait till they're empty and I fill them again. I keep them away from light and away from heat. And I know taste well enough to know that when I try something and it's flat, I get rid of it.
How do you get rid of them?
I just put them in the garden.
Okay.
Just get them out, but I don't like throwing them in the bin. It feels like awful, like putting a dead body in there or something. It feels inhumane.
That is true, especially when there's like a lot more going on, a lot more love with spices. Before we get to our last segment, I'm very curious about, because we talk about a lot of spices, that how there are spices which have similar kind of, when I said, again, talking music term, there are spices which have the same tone or same tonality, similar kind of texture and flavor. So is it okay to replace one with another if for example, if you're making korma, right? Because I've seen you make a lot of korma, so that's why I'm asking. When you're making a korma, can you replace one spice with something else? And how would that react to the korma?
Okay, so I've just written a book called The Spice Companion.
Yes.
You can go onto my website and you can
We'll
buy
check it out.
that book if you want to.
And
But
also show note.
But in that book, I mean, I detail 57 spices. They're just the ones I use most commonly. And for every spice, I give a replacement. And I am answering your question, by the way, Sadaf. But with those replacements, so just say you go to the cupboard and a recipe calls for something and you don't have it. That replacement is never one thing. Because when you're talking about replacing spice, you're talking about aroma. So I understand what you're saying, like there's some that are in the same tonality. So for example, fennel powder and aniseed powder are probably two that are quite close, but they're still different.
Great.
So if I was trying to replace fennel powder and I was using aniseed powder, I would add a little bit of ginger powder because fennel powder is brighter than aniseed powder and ginger powder has a brightness. So I would make a combination of those and then replace, because what a recipe is calling for is spice function. So spices have functions, and that's how Indians use them, whether or not you know it. You're not using it for flavor, you're using it for function. So one of the big things I say in my classes as a first is spice is not about flavor. And everyone stops and goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, in India, we know our food is full of flavor. We don't think about that. That's a given. It's going to be delicious. We think about function. So I think about what that spice is going to do, what tone I'm trying to achieve, what architecture I'm trying to construct, what tradition I'm trying to adhere to, and then I replace using that information. So replacement, if you don't replace, it's kind of fine. Like it's honestly, if you're just like a normal person who doesn't really know, you won't know. If you don't know, you don't know. Yeah. But when you're trying to recreate food, and I feel like for Indians, no matter what your Indianness or where you are in, you know, if you live inside or outside or whatever, we're always eating ourselves. We're eating our culture. We're eating our families. We're eating our recollections. We're eating our geography. We're eating our mythology. Yeah. So you want to eat it the way you know it, right? So you want to replace the spice well so that you're not eating a bastardized version of what you know yourself to be.
Correct.
Right.
That's okay. That's an interesting.
That was a lot. I feel like that was a lot. That was a big answer.
Yeah.
I thought actually wanted to say something, but that's interesting because snail is for Cardana. Coming back. That's interesting because we often think out in like what I think Archit also asked in the beginning and what you also answered, right? That demystifying spices, and I think often when we replace certain things, that sort of gives us the control and command of how we want our dish to be. And when you're talking about, right, that the spices are not flavor, we know it's flavorful, but it's not used for flavors in Indian cuisine. That to me tells a lot. That go crazy, use whatever spice that you want to, and come up with something else. Like how you sprinkle cumin seeds and other things on your eggs.
Well, it's just a way of teaching people. But do you know what's so interesting?
Yeah.
Is that even if you make a recipe exactly as the recipe says, and say, so when I left home, my dad gave me my grandmother's recipes, and I cannot make a recipe to taste like her. I cannot make my dad's recipe to taste like my dad. My recipes taste like me, no matter if I do exactly what they say.
Correct.
That's fascinating.
Isn't that interesting? But I'm sure you know that thing, right? You've tried to make something your mum made or your dad made, and you're like, what the actual?
Yeah. You can't replace that same flavor.
And that's what I mean by this. No, go.
Sorry, some people say that, it's just the different water. Like, yahan ka pani alag hai. So
no, it's the hand.
I
It's
was
a
about
It's
to
hand.
say
your
that.
hand.
I was
Hand
about to
also,
say that
yeah.
it's the hand.
It's the
Yeah.
hand.
This is the magic.
It is though, but I think that's what's beautiful. And that's when I talk about, to take it right back to the beginning, when I talked about the animate nature, the sentient nature of an ingredient that most people think of as being very dead, dried spice. It's so animate because it translates you. And what could be any more sentient than that? It feels you, and it takes your flavor through its body, and then it puts it into that dish. It's like magic.
Yeah.
I never thought about spices in that sense, but now I do.
Now you do. Oh my God, I
Yeah.
just love it.
But you know what I'm
love it.
really craving to hear?
What?
Which are your overrated, underrated, and favorite spices? So
Oh,
controversial, but you start us off with overrated.
do I have to? I feel like they'll
Yeah.
revolt.
They will not. We will talk to them.
Oh, okay. I'm going to say this, but I'm going to immediately regret it. I'm only saying it because
We asked.
of the way that world food culture sits right now. But I'm going to say haldi. I'm going to say turmeric is overrated as a cure-all,
I agree with
Okay.
you on that.
but
I don't
not as
like
a
haldi.
spice.
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
I love her.
Oh,
You love her.
Yeah.
It's a
I
her.
do. I don't know. They're all kind of female to me, really. I think that's
Yeah.
just me.
so it's her. Also, haldi ends with I, so it is based on Indian names. Anything with- technically, because ends with a vowel, so it becomes a girl's name.
Female. Yes.
yeah.
So I think that, but yeah, I feel like I'm in trouble now. Okay, keep going. So what was it?
No, that
So
that
overrated,
nuance.
underrated.
Underrated. Yeah.
Salt. I think salt's underrated. I don't think
That's very interesting.
I give my salt lots and lots and lots of consideration, and I use multiple types of salts normally in every dish. And apply different forms of different salts at different times. And that, I think, if you can work well with salts and with fats, you almost don't need anything else. Not traditionally in Indian context, but just in cooking generally.
Right.
Wow.
And also salt enhances or brings up the flavors of other spices as well.
Yeah.
It's the communicator. Salt's
That's lovely.
the megaphone.
Yeah.
That translates and helps spice articulate beautifully.
That's a lovely way of putting it. Yeah.
Before Sarina, you goes to your favorite one, I just want to also ask Archit, what is your underrated spice? Not a blend, but just an underrated spice.
I can't think of anything underrated. I think they're all properly rated.
Time, nothing.
But I would say lal mirch. I know it's very commonly used, but lal mirch, at least in Spain, is underrated for me. Most food here, like it's okay. So when you go to a restaurant, actually anywhere in the world, apart from an Italian restaurant, the condiments they give you are salt and pepper, black pepper. They don't give you red pepper. So that in that way, it's underrated. They should give you red pepper as well to sprinkle over your food. I like sprinkling red pepper over everything.
Yeah.
I think they should give you amchur to sprinkle all over your food with salt and pepper.
It will taste much better.
Delicious.
Yeah.
What about you, Sadaf? What's your underrated?
I was literally, mine was supposed to be amchur because, and actually the family, which I mean, citrusy flavor or citrusy spice.
Amchur is great,
including amchur or kokum, even including lemon. That doesn't come under the traditional spice, but I think these are underrated. Only because I think when you add any of these elements to your dish, it just rounds the flavor and gives you like that balance. So that's what I usually prefer, and I would add, if possible, in almost everything. Yeah. On that, what is your favorite spice?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the last one.
I mean, I don't really have a favorite, but I probably the one I can share a quick little story with you is Cumin Seed Zero, because it just tastes like my dad.
Oh,
And I was recently at a restaurant in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And it was her name's Heli Rashura. She's an incredible Gujarati chef, but she does it's called Enter Via Laundry,
Mhm.
because she used to have a home where you'd go and buy her laundry to
Mhm.
eat at her house, but now she has an actual kitchen. And she did this whole Kashmir, this menu from Kashmir and Jammu. And I went and I ate, and I went with my 15-year-old son. And the first bit of food was white asparagus
Mhm.
with like a zira just toasted on the top.
Oh, nice.
And I took one bite and I burst into tears. I was sobbing. I've never done that before. I was sobbing at the table, and my poor son was sitting opposite me like, oh my God, my mum is weird.
He's trying on spices.
But it was like, I've never been fed a memory of my family by someone else. It's the first time that that's ever happened for me, and it took my legs out from under me. And I think that has to be the spice. That's my favorite.
Well, yeah, I like cumin. In fact, to be honest, I was out of my cumin seed powder. So early in the morning, that's what I was doing. But yeah, what is your favorite? Yes.
No, just sorry, Sadaf, I have to ask. Cumin seed or cumin powder? Which one do you prefer? Because for me, it's the seed.
It depends. So, for example, if I'm making dahi vada, etc., I like cumin seed powder. But otherwise, like today only, poha was the breakfast. So raw cumin seeds. But yeah, but I think aroma-wise, if I have just to go with the aroma, I would go with the cumin seed powder. Roasted
just what you roasted. Okay, so just what you said then. Do you know most people that I deal with, all of them actually, don't even understand that there's a difference between the powder and the seed. Oh. They don't differentiate. So that's what I mean about the intrinsic nature of Indian understanding of what spice is that you don't even know what you know. You know so much before you even know anything at all.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's we're quite awesome people. I mean, we as in all of us, the Indians, spice lovers. Yeah. What is there? Do you have any favorite Archit? Apart from salt and pepper and chilies?
Already mentioned it, right? Garlic, black pepper, red pepper.
Garlic
what do you love about garlic?
Just hard to describe it. But
we established he has bad communication skills.
Yeah, that's right. He's the dark horse, isn't he? I forgot.
Yeah.
This is never going old now.
Because it's hot and sweet and acidic at the same time. And dark.
You're the spice mistress. I'm not the spice master.
When you're back in Delhi, Archit, I will make sure that I make garlic kheer for you, and then I'll feed that garlic kheer.
Garlic kheer?
Yeah.
Really?
Awesome. Yeah. It's an old traditional recipes
of
Nawab's garlic kheer and garlic halwa. I am not fan of halwa, but I'm not fan of kheer either, but it just tastes good. It has a little bit of garlicky aroma, but yeah, it's nice. You got to boil it though in alum water, and that's when you get really nice. I mean, you get rid of that pungent, strong, sharp flavor of garlic.
So you sweeten it by boiling it and poach and then you put it in the kheer. Is that what you do?
Yeah, so similar to kheer, you just sort of reduce the milk, but while that's happening, you also need to you need to boil the garlic at least 3 to 4 times in alum water. So boil it once, throw it out, boil it again, throw the water out, boil it again. That will cut the pungency and add it in milk. Many people, the traditionalist quote unquote, they would not add khoa or the hardened milk. I think that's what khoa is in English.
Khoya, yeah.
So you add khoya in that because that will sort of give a really nice, beautiful, the kheer texture that you want. and I like to add cashew in that because it confuses people because they would think it is cashew kheer, but it's not. So it's like a mix of cashew and garlic that they're getting. Yeah,
that would make sense, but that would work because like the fatty blandness in the cashew would sort of balance out just what was left of that sort of high astringent
correct
garlic.
You should try that, and also of course add cinnamon and cardamom powder.
You can try that. अगर आपका खोया खो गया.
नहीं खोया. खोया पाना पड़ेगा, फिर बनाना पड़ेगा. खैर, on खोया पाया, we are going to where Sarina, what is where all people can find you and reach out to you?
Okay, you can find me on my Instagram page, Sarina Kamini. I have a YouTube channel, Sarina Kamini. I also have a website, sarinakamini.com. It's kind of my own universe. My kids laugh at me for that. They're like, I'm Sarina from sarinakamini.com. But honestly, just Google my name, and I swear, if you put it in the link, but yeah, there's a whole world there. I'd love to have some visits. I really do love what I do, and if I can just say to both of you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. I could literally talk to you for 10 hours straight. It's so enchanting to speak to spices with people who have a framework that, you know, is so similar, and it's so easy and so fun. And thank you so much for having me. It's been just joy.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll
Thank you. It's been a delight.
Another episode as well with you, because we need to talk about more on different spice notes. Yeah. Talk about spices and food to people who understand it equally.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. So find her on these things. She also writes and works with SBS. We'll put that link as well, and the book as well. Everything will be in the show note. And is there any other book or something that you're working on right now?
There is. I've had the first one's a memoir, Spirits in a Spice Jar. The second is The Spice Companion, which was the introductory guide. And currently I'm working on a book called Taste, Time, Temper, Toast. And that is a deep dive into masala, I'm going to call it, not spice, because it really is an indigenous way of looking at those aromatics for a Western audience. So there'll be recipes, lots of information on that about Ayurveda, but also about the, I guess, you know, Indian perspectives on what spice is, and flavour being the least of it. There's a whole bunch of other information that makes them so enchanting and engaging and just beautiful. Love those spices.
Wonderful. So we're going to wait for that book to come. Very, very, very good luck to you. And
Thank
on
you.
that spicy note, दुकान करते हैं बंद.